Hello, and welcome to episode 8 of the In the Clutch podcast. My name is Drew Clutchy, and I'm here alongside my co-host Jeremy Wilson, who has just had his heart shattered once again because Norman Powell has been on the move.
I mean, Norm Powell didn't belong on the Trailblazers. I'm glad he gets back to Kawhi and gets a chance to compete with another championship. It was pretty heartbreaking when he got moved the first time, but I think we can safely say that the Raptors won the Norm Powell trade when they got Gary Trent and the Trailblazers got Keon Johnson. So,
Yeah, Gary Trent's looked good. And don't forget, too, also in LA Clipperland, Serge Ibaka's there.
although aren't they trying to trade him to get his contract off the books?
Yeah, but right now, they're all there. So they're just trying to rebuild the 2019 Raptors, except they're just tossing in Paul George for some reason. So I guess Paul George is the Siakam replacement on the 2019 Raptors for the 2022 Clippers.
The model of a modern day championship team. Just build the Raptors again and everything will be fine.
Well, anything works with Kawhi. And I keep counting Kawhi out. I'm like, oh, Kawhi's not going to come back from this one. He's been out too long. And then he comes back and just plays incredible because he's Kawhi. So I keep thinking, oh, like the whole Kawhi's career is like relatively over in terms of championships and stuff. And then he's just going to come back and do it again. I know it.
Yeah, and I mean, uh, as long as they can both come back healthy, and Kawhi and Paul George, now you're starting, I think Reggie Jackson at point guard,
Yeah, they've committed to that now.
but then Norm, Paul George, Kawhi, and Zubac with good players off the bench. Like we've seen a lot of the Clippers bench players playing recently, and I'm not sure if you saw that Wizards game where the Wizards fully collapsed and blew that 35-point lead to the Clippers backups. But like they have some solid bench players.
Yeah, whether or not they can, and we're still up in the air about whether or not we'll see Kawhi and or Paul George again this year. I know Paul George, they're waiting to see how he heals before deciding whether or not he'll get surgery. So based on the fact that that's where he's at, I imagine we probably won't see him again. But the Clippers have never shut the door on Kawhi coming back. But similar to Paul George, like we haven't really seen anything of Kawhi, haven't seen him working out or playing. So I can't imagine we'll see him. Because the other thing you have to remember is when a player comes back from injury, they're not just back. Because when you look at Klay Thompson, he's back playing 20 minutes a game, shooting 1 of 7 for a while, and he's been back now basically the entire month of January, and we're into Feb, and now he's just starting to look like Klay Thompson again, where halfway through the first quarter he has 3 3-pointers and Curry has 3 3-pointers, and the Warriors are up 20-4. So the fact that it takes that month, right? If Kawhi and Paul George and like same with Jamal Murray, anybody else, if these players are really going to come back, they have to be back at least, I would argue, a month or a month and a half before the season ends. Like really for me, it's like it's closer to the All-Star break. Like if the players aren't coming back after the All-Star break, and this is only players that haven't played like all season at all, they've been off since last season or a season and a half ago. But for me, they have to come back early enough that we can see them get warmed up before the playoffs. Because as much as we like to joke about it, you're not just going to insert Kawhi Leonard into the Clippers lineup with one regular season game to go and then win the championship.
Right, because you'd really like to get, I don't know exactly how much, it'll vary person to person. I mean, for Klay, you would expect it would take him a little longer to get readjusted just because it's all about his shooting touch and it might take you a little while to figure out that shooting touch again. For a player like Kawhi, where it's more based on like he plays great defense and he's like really physical, and that stuff might be a little bit easier to get back. So you might not need quite the amount of time that somebody like Klay would need to come back from an injury like that. But yeah, you would really hope because if he comes back, like you said, one regular season game left, and then they get into the first round of the playoffs. Right now, if they get into the first round, they're going to play Phoenix or Golden State,
Right.
and with Kawhi still trying to figure it out and Paul George still trying to figure it out, and them having not played together almost at all, doesn't seem like you're going to win that game or that
Right.
series.
Yeah, I was going to say, let alone 7 games. Even if they end up in the play-in, right, you might have the Lakers in the play-in kind of thing this season. So it'd be even hard to get out of the play-in in a one-off game against potentially LeBron James. But I think the more interesting thing is when you look at the Norm Powell deal, I think it's pretty clear in theory the Clippers won the deal, and like you argued, potentially the Raptors won the deal. But to me, the thing that stands out more is that the Blazers are saying that they're out. Like at least for the rest of the season, they've taken on dead salary and Dame's still hurt and CJ is playing, I believe, but like the Blazers are signaling that they're out for this year, which the Blazers for most of what I've known of basketball since 2012, 2013, because they've had Dame for so long, they've always been a playoff team. So
Right.
for them to go from having, and especially too because they have, well, had as of yesterday, Dame, CJ, Norm Powell, Nurkic, Covington. They had a really solid team. Anthony Simmons is there. Anthony Simmons having a great season, especially since Dame went out. It really stands out to me that by trading Powell and Covington, that the Blazers have signaled that they're done.
Yeah, I just want to touch on the actual trade again for 1 second. The Blazers, how you managed to not get a first round pick when you're trading Powell and Covington in the same deal and get no real positive assets in return unless you really like Keon Johnson. Like, how do you not get a first round pick out of that deal? But regardless, yeah, they're currently the 10 seed and they've really just checked out. So I guess if they make the play in, so be it. They'll get eliminated in the play in
Right.
and they'll just, I guess, see what happens in the lottery.
So then it'll come down to whether or not they move on from the Dame CJ era or not.
Yeah, I think you got to at this point. You're gonna give up Fernie Simons a long term contract, and if you're gonna give him that big extension, you want him to be not your sixth man. So
Do you move
trade
on from
CJ.
both of them or just one?
Man, it depends how committed you are to a rebuild. If you're really committed to a rebuild, you move on from both. If you're not super committed, I guess you hold on to Dame. But I think the best option for them is probably to move on from both of them, maximize their young assets, and start again.
Right. I still think, which I know this is the unpopular opinion, but out of Dame and CJ, I still think you trade Dame just because you might get the value back of somebody like Ben Simmons, who I quiver at because he's not going to shoot the ball. But you might get somebody like Ben Simmons back, which at least that's an all-star caliber player. Versus, I think if you trade CJ, you're not going to get a player that's going to move the needle enough. Like you could get a player the caliber of Miles Turner or something, which is not going to move the needle enough for you.
Right.
Because I think teams always overvalue their assets and other teams undervalue assets of other teams. So you might think like if you're the Blazers, you know that CJ is a great player, but the other teams aren't going to value this CJ in a trade the same way that you do.
Right.
So Dame is unarguably a superstar player. So if you're going to trade Dame to a playoff contender, which we know Dame's not only just incredible all the way around, but he's also clutch, then they have to value him highly. Versus CJ, you're not going to get enough to move the needle.
Right. And on Ben Simmons, I really don't know how many teams are still interested in Ben Simmons. You don't know what you're getting. You know, all you really know for sure is you're getting a player who's not willing to play for the 76ers because he doesn't like Doc Rivers. He doesn't like Embiid. Like, he's just not happy, so he's not willing to play for them. How do you know he's going to come to your team and be happy and play? And if he does play, how do you know he's overcome that mental block of not being able to take a layup in game 7 of a conference semifinal?
Well, and frankly, you don't. But I was listening to the Woj pod this week, and Ramona Shelburne was on, and she was talking about she's a Philadelphia insider. So she was talking about the whole Ben Simmons situation. And apparently he's in great shape. He's playing like 5-on-5 with guys around the Philadelphia area, just not at the Sixers facility. So apparently he's somewhat ready to roll. Like he's not just eating donuts in his mansion, like hanging out, right? And apparently
Right.
he's watching all of the Sixers games and stuff like that. So you're right. You totally can't guarantee that he's come over the mental block. You can't. You might never shoot free throws well. He might never shoot like jump shots. But do you really think you're going to win with Dame? Given you're Portland, so you're not going to sign a major free agent. You don't
If
particularly have
the
any great
76ers trade for
assets.
Dame, I would trade for Dame. I've got the 76ers coming out of the East for sure. Because
If you could trade
Dame's,
for Dame,
if you could trade for Dame, because you got Joel Embiid playing P level, and as long as Dame comes back relatively healthy, and even if he's 80% of superstar Damian Lillard, I don't know who can match that in the East other than Brooklyn, who's been bad recently.
Right. So if you're Portland bringing in Ben Simmons, then do
Yeah,
you think Ben Simmons is worth it? Because I think if I'm Portland right now, Ben Simmons is worth it because we're not winning with Dame.
I think Portland would be one of the few teams that I would think might want to trade for Ben Simmons still, because if you're taking a shot in the future, why not bring in Ben Simmons, who you don't know exactly what his ceiling is, and you just got to take a shot and hope he'll play for you.
Right. And it just comes down to whether or not Portland thinks they can win with Dame, which obviously I'm assuming they do think they can win with Dame. So I don't necessarily think they'll move on from him. I'd like to touch on the for anybody who's interested, the NBA All-Star reserves came out this week, and I'm in an interesting situation because I think DeJounte Murray got snubbed. But as JR keenly pointed out to me right before the podcast started, if he got snubbed, I have to replace somebody with DeJounte Murray. So you can't just add him to the All-Star team. So I got into this tricky situation where I'm looking at Murray's stats. He's 19.6 points, 8.5 rebounds, 9 assists, and 2 steals a game. But obviously, the Spurs are not having a great year. So I get into this tricky situation of, in theory, I'd replace Andrew Wiggins, but Andrew Wiggins is an all-star starter. So then I got into this tricky situation where I thought, okay, well then I could replace Draymond Green with DeJounte Murray. But Draymond Green, while his stats aren't great, you obviously can't argue the impact he has on the Warriors, and he might win Defensive Player of the Year this year. So the only major snub for me in the All-Star game is DeJounte Murray, but I don't necessarily know how to fit him into the game other than Andrew Wiggins. But Andrew Wiggins is actually, because of the fan vote, he's a starter. So I don't really know how to fix it, but DeJounte Murray got snubbed.
Yeah, and DeJounte Murray's got really good stats, and this is the issue when you run into so many positional restrictions, that you just can't get the best players into the All-Star game because
Right.
they don't play the right positions, because they're like the guard position is stacked out west.
No, exactly. And the forward positions are so good in the East with Kevin Durant, Embiid, and Giannis.
Yeah, and I've got a snub that I can actually replace in the East. Chris Middleton made the All-Star game, and Pascal Siakam did not. And Pascal Siakam's averaging 2 more points, 3 more rebounds, the same amount of assists on better overall field goal percentage, and just 3% worse from three.
Wow.
And
Siakam's in Toronto.
I think the issue that Siakam ran into was, at the time the All-Star reserves came out, the Raptors were probably just a couple games over 500.
Right.
Um, and on a team like that, that's fairly mediocre, it's possible that it was hard to give him 2 All-Stars.
Right.
So he might have split votes with Van Fleet, and Van Fleet made the team, and Siakam didn't because he just couldn't give the Raptors 2 All-Stars.
Right.
But I don't see how you can make an argument that Siakam's not more deserving of an All-Star nod than Chris Middleton.
Right. So the only other player I had in that conversation to fill that spot was Jared Allen. So
Right.
I know in one of our past episodes here we went over everybody's stats and everything, so I won't go back through it. But Jared Allen's a double player with points and rebounds, and then also obviously his impact on the defensive end. And Cleveland's frankly good this year, so he's the only other player that I wasn't. Well, I don't think Middleton should have made it. I also wouldn't necessarily slide Siakam in there effortlessly because I think I'd be trying to fill the hole with Jared Allen.
Right. And I think, if I'm not wrong, Darius Garland made the All-Star reserves.
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, one second. I'm just pulling that up right. Yeah, Darius Garland's an All-Star reserve.
And a team like Cleveland, I get that they're good, but based on their just caliber of players, they don't seem like a team too that should have 2 All-Stars. So again,
Right.
the issue with Jared Allen that Jared Allen might have ran into is that coaches were like, well, we can't give the Cavs 2 All-Stars because they've got a bunch of borderline All-Stars. And so Darius Garland kind of took his votes.
Right. Yeah, no, fair enough. It's an interesting thing to try to decide who gets 2 All-Stars and who doesn't. Because when I look at the Western Conference, the Suns obviously 100% get 2 because they only have 9 losses. But at the
10
same
now,
time, because neither Chris Paul... Pardon me, sorry?
Sorry, they got 10 losses now.
Oh, they lost. Okay, so they have 10 losses. But neither Chris Paul nor Devin Booker are particularly like flashy, and obviously a huge portion of the All Star voting is the fan vote for the
Right,
starters, anyways. That's why you didn't see them in the starting lineup. But so obviously they're deserving of 2 All Stars, but I have trouble, oddly enough, wrapping my head around that. If that
right,
makes sense, because they're not like when you look at like DeJounte Murray, he's almost a triple double, right? And obviously, there's no way I could argue that DeJounte Murray should be in over Chris Paul or Devin Booker because the Suns are 41-10 at the time of recording. So it's tricky for me because it's stats versus the eye test.
right. And for reference, teams that have 2 All-Stars starting in the East are Brooklyn with Kevin Durant and James Harden. And Brooklyn's the 6th seed, but it's hard to argue that Kevin Durant and James Harden shouldn't be an All-Star.
Right.
Um, Milwaukee, who's the 4th seed, and Chris Middleton snuck in there, and Chicago, who's the 1 seed.
Right.
So Milwaukee is just, I feel like it's almost more on name recognition, where
Right.
Chris Middleton seems like an All-Star and Jared Allen doesn't necessarily.
Right. No, exactly.
And then the Western Conference, your 2 All-Star teams are the Warriors have 3, the Suns have 2, and the Jazz have 2. I think that's everybody. And so
The Warriors have 3 All Stars without Klay Thompson.
that's
Just take a minute to let
ridiculous.
that sink in.
And I would argue that the Warriors should only have 2 All-Stars because 18-4-2 doesn't necessarily seem like enough for Andrew Wiggins to be an All-Star.
Yeah, but
But
nevertheless,
that's
it happened. We're here
it's
now.
not my business. Um, yeah, I don't want to take anything away from Andrew Wiggins, but if you just take a look at the All-Star rosters and you look at all the names on there, and you're picking one that does not belong, you would pick Andrew Wiggins 100% of the time.
Well, yeah, but Draymond Green only averages like 9 points a game.
Yeah, but
Like
it's
that's
Draymond Green.
really bad, right? Like it's not like he's like Chris Paul's averaging 15 points a game this season, which that's low for Chris Paul, but like 9 points.
Yeah, Draymond's really down there. Yeah, he's averaging right now like 8, 7.5, and 7.5. But the defense is just so good.
Right. Well, yeah,
But
A plus 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 defense.
yeah, and
Um,
that's got to factor in.
Speaking of Andrew Wiggins, does Andrew Wiggins give you hope that you can pick somebody in the first round and have them not pan out, but then just get them into the right situation and have it work? So like the same situation with Cam Reddish, where now Cam Reddish is a Knick and the Knicks still aren't playing him. But does that give you hope that if you're a team, you could go try to get Cam Reddish and maybe make it work? Or same with RJ Barrett, who's like not RJ Barrett's not bad, but in the same way that Andrew Wiggins wasn't bad for the first 6 years of his career, 6, 7 years. But does that give you hope that you can take a player and turn them into an all-star and you should go get that player?
I don't think so. I mean, Andrew Wiggins was just on a really bad team for the first part of his career. And
Right.
as a first overall pick, again, he wasn't probably everything you'd want out of a first overall pick, but he's had seasons where he was averaging 23.5 points and 22.5 points. And Golden State went and got him. And instead of him trying his best to be one of the 2 best players on a really awful team, he just got to be a really good role player.
Right.
And clearly that's the situation he's supposed to be in. But when you draft a first overall pick, are you really hoping like, man, I want that guy to be a really good role player someday?
Yeah, which is fair enough. But compared to all the other first round picks or first overall picks that are total busts, to me, that's
Yeah.
not bad. Because
Yeah.
not every first overall pick is going to be like, oh, yeah, like LeBron. Like, oh, well, not that Zion's panned out particularly well, which we covered last week. But, like, not every first overall pick is going to be an instant stud, right?
Right. But you would hope that your first overall pick can be at least the second best player on a championship team sometime, right?
I guess
Um,
that's true.
so recent first round picks, there are obviously a couple busts in here. Like 2011 on is Kyrie, Anthony Davis, Anthony Bennett, who's Anthony Bennett, Andrew Wiggins, Karl-Anthony Towns, Ben Simmons, and then Markel Fultz, but then DeAndre Ayton, Zion, and Anthony Edwards.
Right. So if you rank all those players, Andrew Wiggins is probably the 7th best.
Right. Andrew
But
Wiggins is going to come in third last, other than Markel and Anthony Bennett.
yeah, but it's better than Mark Hill or Anthony Bennett. That's what I'm saying. So would you rather? So let's say you could go get Cam Reddish right now, right, from the Knicks, who the Knicks, frankly, aren't playing him. They went and got him, and Tibbs won't play him. So
Right.
if you could go get Cam Reddish right now, and he could turn into the fifth starter on a championship team at his
Yeah.
best case scenario, is that worth it to you to make that happen?
Cam Reddish for me is somebody I would like to have on almost any team. Just the type of player he is, where he's a 6'8" small forward who can shoot, right? So he's a like long, he could turn into a good 3-and-D player. So just kind of that mold of player. It really depends on like in terms of giving me hope for first round picks that don't necessarily pan out in their first team. Um, if you draft like a small guard that doesn't pan out, chances are he's not going to pan out anywhere because he's just like he's got to be incredible to be good almost. If you got like a 5'10" guard,
that's the Malachi Flynn situation.
right?
We're living
Um, and then in terms of Cam Reddish, where he's 6'8" and shoots on decent efficiency from three, if you can just kind of help him learn how to play good NBA defense, he's exactly the type of player the Raptors are kind of building their team up off of.
right. It'll be interesting to see now if Wiggins is a. Let's say it's hard to say that the Warriors repaired Wiggins because he, like you said, he was 22 points per game for most of his career on just not so great efficiency and not dominant defense or anything. So I'm not going to use the word repaired, but it'll be hard. It'll be interesting to see if other teams want to take a similar approach to this. And if Wiggins, let's say, is the third best scorer on the Warriors and the fourth best player, it'll be interesting to see if other teams want to pick up later first round picks and try to make them like the fourth best scorer and the last starter on the team type thing, right? Because you're not necessarily going to get the same results as Wiggins, because you're right, Wiggins is a number 1 overall pick. But can you repair a number 10 overall pick who hasn't played a lot of minutes in his career and has had some bad situations and make him your fifth starter?
Right, because you can, yeah, if you want to take somebody and you think you like his potential, but he's just in the wrong situation, and it's just not where he belongs, and you think you can fit him in, and you have a good culture, your team plays good defense, and you can just fit him in as a role player almost, and just let him be himself in a somewhat limited atmosphere where he's not expected to be first round pick, like top pick kind of player, and you don't want him to average 25. You want him to average 18 and shoot 40% from three.
Right. No,
And I
exactly.
think that's totally reasonable.
So one final point on All-Stars, except not NBA All-Stars. I was watching the NHL All-Star Skills Competition yesterday, and it was awful. I know for a lot of people probably know the NHL was under really high criticism for doing one player per team. So you have players who got snubbed because they weren't the best player on their team, but their team is phenomenal, and therefore, because you're pulling, like, there's teams that are just awful, like 10 wins on the season, and they have an all-star now. So it was just all over the place. There were so many players at the all-star game. Like, every event was just loaded with people, and there were people doing the shootout who are, like, the defensemen on a team that has 10 wins, and they're in the shootout because they have to do a skills competition, and we've got them at the all-star game. But the other thing is, the All-Star game the All-Star skills competition, moved so slow, and there were so many events that were, I'm not going to say like complex, but complex for a skills competition. So like I was watching with a few friends, and we were just kind of casually watching and talking, and there were some events where we literally didn't know what was happening. Like it was in Las Vegas, and they did this poker thing where the players were shooting at playing card targets that were set up. And anyway, if you saw it, you'll know. And a couple players just like randomly got eliminated, but because we weren't precisely listening to the commentary, we literally didn't know why. And there were like 6 of us of marginal listening. Some of us were really paying attention, some of us not so much, and none of us really knew why they got eliminated. And then not to mention that the whole event just went slow. So to watch everything moving slowly and be confused, it was just like, it was too much.
Right. That's totally fair. You would hope like the NBA All-Star Weekend, I feel like is really easy to follow.
Right.
In terms of you got 3-point competition and you can kind of casually watch that where guys are just you're watching the best shooters in the world throw up threes, and that's just what they do. Or the dunk contest is possibly, I feel like, along with maybe the home run derby in baseball, like the best all-star event across any sport.
Well, did you see Anthony Simons and Obi Toppin?
Yeah, but like normally.
But
uh,
interestingly, so the people I was watching the NHL All Star game with, or All Star Skills competition, the game is today. They are all NHL fans in the same way that you and I are NBA fans, and they think that the NBA skills competition is too repetitive. It's like it's the same thing every year with some different people. But
right.
to me, so they're getting bored of that. But to me, it's measurable. It's like when we watch a bad dunk contest, like we did last year with Anthony Simons almost kissing the rim and Obi Toppin just kind of dunking the ball normally.
Yeah.
We can compare, like it's measurable because we know what Aaron Gordon has done and Zach LaVine and obviously Vince Carter and so on. But and then like even when they go through and do the skills competitions, like A, you can tell what's happening, but B, if they do it in 14 seconds, that event has happened in past years. So we know who's done it in 12 seconds, who's done it in 38 seconds that one time when they couldn't hit the
Right.
three or whatever. So to me, it's not, I'll admit, like obviously it's repetitive and maybe that does get boring, but at least we know exactly what's happening. So you can just sit and casually watch and enjoy.
Yeah, and that's totally fair. And I've basically chosen to forget that dunk contest. I know I mentioned Anthony Simons to my girlfriend. She was like, "I know that name. Was he in the dunk contest?" And I said, "No."
No, no,
And
we
then I
don't count
went and
that
checked,
one.
and I was like, "Oh yeah, he actually was in the dunk contest, and he won the dunk
Yeah, I was gonna say he
contest."
won the dunk contest.
But all the same, yeah, the dunk contest tends to be a really, really good event that I don't
We
complain about.
to make a Disney Plus reference, we don't talk about Bruno. No, no, no.
Something I just want to touch on with all the Warriors kind of started the small ball trend in like 2015 or so when they started playing Draymond at center and their closing lineup.
Right,
The Raptors recently have ran a lineup of all players between 6'8" and 6'9",
including the point guard.
included their lineup was Scotty Barnes, OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, Chris Boucher, and Precious Achua is the lineup they've been running at, not for long stints, but for
Right.
some stints recently.
That's interesting, actually.
That's really interesting. And depending on the type of players you have, obviously that lineup is actually, I think, relatively good because I trust OG and Siakam and even Scotty Barnes to have the quickness to be able to guard guards.
Right,
And I don't think guards have the physical ability to guard OG and Anobi in the post.
right. No, absolutely. I go back and forth, and I know I've touched on this numerous times. I go back and forth about the whole having a lineup where you switch everything because while you're good at everything, it always makes me feel like you're great at nothing. So if you get a team that has like a great like Jokic and Jamal Murray,
Yeah,
then you've got like Siakam guarding Jamal Murray, which you might be quick enough to do it, or the combination of quick and long enough, but it's Jamal Murray. And then also you're kind of struggling guarding Jokic as well with like Scotty Barnes and a switch. So that gets
yeah,
kind of questionable for me. Or it's the same like Gobert and Donovan Mitchell or Embiid, and if they ever get somebody for Ben Simmons, you get into this tricky situation where you're good in every
right,
scenario, but I always feel like you're great at nothing.
right, and that can be fair. I think, in terms of lineups where you switch everything, I love it. I
Right.
love the ability to just have the point guard, the center come up beside screen for a point guard, and your two defenders just switch. I love that. We're
Right.
switching everything off ball so nobody gets open on an off ball three. Like I love that concept, but like you pointed out, it's going to get difficult when you get really superstar point guards or really superstar centers. Like in terms of dominant, if you have a really quick, like good ball handling point guard, a
Right.
small forward who could normally guard a point guard might not be able to guard him.
Right.
And if you got a center like Joel Embiid, like OG's fine guarding most centers, but I don't trust OG in the post against Joel Embiid.
Right. Exactly. So that's where But obviously, those are specific scenarios, right? If you get a team like Brooklyn, where it's like a great power forward or point guard or
Right.
whatever you want to call it, Kevin Durant, small forward, he plays center now. So you get a great player like Kevin Durant, and then Kyrie and Harden, and you can switch, and Joe Harris, and just switch
Right.
all the time. Then you're in a great setup, and you're going to be
Yeah.
cruising in that game. Obviously, you're never cruising against a fully loaded Brooklyn team, but you're trying your best. Versus if you get these specific nitpicky things, it makes me uncomfortable. But the other thing that I have to remember with Toronto is
Right.
we don't have a center on the team. It's like we can't fix
Oh, we have
it.
Ken Birch.
Well, sorry, we don't have a tall center on the team. So like we can't even like switch the lineup depending on the game. Which
Right.
that's a position that the Warriors are aspiring to be in. Is that they're gonna have James Wiseman. Hopefully, it doesn't really look like this year that he'll actually get included in the lineup when he comes back. But not only will they be able to do the Draymond thing, which is their best case scenario most of the time, but in a matchup with like Anthony Davis or Giannis or Embiid, they can put Wiseman out there and then still have Draymond on the court.
Right.
So that's like for me, that's when that team will be in
Can
really
play
good shape. Versus
small
when,
ball.
sorry, go ahead.
That's a really good concept where the Warriors can play small ball, and also if they want to play like a big lineup, like they could even start. Like they could move if Steph Curry was off the court briefly. I'm sure they could put Klay Thompson, or they could use Draymond as the primary ball handler, and run all guys that are like 6'7" or higher without sacrificing too much shooting.
Exactly. So that's when it really works for me is when you get in a scenario like that where you can just make everything work and you have other people to replace it if you don't want to run small ball versus where
Right.
the Raptors are at is we're running small ball because we have to.
Right. And something I've discovered recently in terms of the Raptors, and I really like Pascal Siakam defending guards.
Right.
I love it if Pascal Siakam gets switched onto a guard like Zach LaVine. I really like that matchup because I feel like he's quick enough that he's not gonna get blown by,
Right.
and him being 6'9" with a big wingspan is enough to bother threes and anything at the rim.
It's always if you're a quick player, it's always fun to guard a small guard. Like my best matchup, my best case scenario is always when I get to guard somebody like so I'm 6 feet with long arms, but when I get to guard somebody who's even just like 5'9", 5'10", it makes such a difference for me because I'm quick enough to get them if they try to go to the basket and long enough to contest every shot they take.
Right, exactly. So Pascal Siakam versus Zach LaVine is like Zach LaVine's I think like 6'4" ish, maybe six
Right.
five. And Pascal Siakam's obviously 6'8", 6'9". So the step back threes aren't going to be open, and the layups at the rim aren't going to be open. So where does Zach LaVine shoot?
Like, well, yeah, Zach LaVine will make something happen, but I see your point.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
and that's where it works, right? So I go back and forth on the switching thing. I have to see more of it to really, or I have to see it work in big game situations and stuff like that to really get a good idea of whether or not it's a long term plan. But it's interesting, and I think if I was really going to commit to it, I'd still want the backup of having a big man,
Right.
even if it's not like a good player per se, but just like a an NBA bench quality center who can go out there and just be big enough to go
Right.
and be like even you see the Magic doing it with Robin Lopez. Like
Yeah.
Robin Lopez isn't good, but they physically have him there. So if
Yeah.
somebody's getting violated in a given game by Embiid, they can put him on the court.
Right. And again, I don't think I'm a fan of it as a long term plan either. I think you need a point guard. Fred VanVleet's massive for the Raptors. Like his
Right.
ability to play make is more important, I think, than anybody else's ability to do anything on the
Right.
Raptors. But in terms of like 5 minute spurts, and you get to watch five quick big players play incredible switch fly around defense, it's just a lot of fun to watch.
Oh, absolutely. So to switch topics here, Thursday, February 10th, so that's this coming Thursday, is the NBA trade deadline. So I know we've already talked about the whole Norman Powell situation that went down yesterday, but what other trades do you want to see on deadline day, or have you heard rumors about, Jer?
So this trade I saw this morning, and I've run it through ESPN Trade Machine, and it works. I'd like Patrick Williams and Derek Jones Jr. from the Bulls to go to the Pistons for Jeremy Grant.
I saw that. The
What do you
problem
think?
is I don't know what's in it for the Pistons.
What's in it for the Pistons is that Jeremy Grant, I think, is like 28 or so.
Right.
So Jeremy Grant, just to confirm, is 27. And Patrick Williams, I feel like, is around 23. And in the
Right.
same kind of mold as Jeremy Grant, Patrick Williams is 20. So Patrick Williams fits with Cade Cunningham and can be that Jeremy Grant type player in 6 or 7 years when you're actually trying to be a contender.
Right.
So it fits
But
the timeline,
it fits the
essentially.
timeline, but does it really fit the timeline? Because when you win a championship, are all the players really your age, or do you have players that are 29 and your best player might be 24? Like when you look at the, like, you know what I mean? So does
Right.
it really fit the timeline to have them all be the same age? You got to pay them all at the same time, or does it fit the timeline to be more in like a Phoenix Suns situation where they're kind of in the same age, but like they have Chris Paul, who's obviously older, and then Booker is old, like 5 years older than Bridges or something. So they're not really like they're the same age in the general sense, but as a team, they're not actually all literally on the same timeline. Booker's way more
Right.
experienced than the rest of them.
But in terms of Jeremy Grant, again, is 27 on a $20 million a year contract that expires next year.
Right.
The Pistons aren't, whether or not they're able to keep him around, they're not going to be able to win by the end of his contract. And they
Right.
don't really have that young core that you want bad teams to have. They have Cade Cunningham, and like, is Killian Hayes any good? I don't know.
Yeah. Fair enough.
So
But
if you trade for Patrick Williams, who you feel like can be a really good small forward in coming years,
right.
I think he was picked like fifth or so a couple years ago. Um, then at least you have somebody else you feel like if you really like Killian Hayes, then you have now three good young players that can grow together.
Yeah, I guess that's true. And grow together is the ultimate thing for me, where I'm like, I don't know if grow together actually wins you anything, or if it's just like, oh, like we have a whole bunch of guys that are all the same age.
Right. It's
Because,
just
like I
nice
said, like
to think
my
about.
best case example is actually the Suns, where I'm like, yeah, they're all the quote unquote same age, but really Booker's older than Ayton and Bridges by a fair amount, and then CP's older than Booker as well. So they're like kind of on the same timeline, but not really because Booker's actually really experienced.
Right. But even in terms of the sense, Booker is really experienced. Booker is like 25. I feel like he's been in the league for 7 years. Um, but they're Devin Booker, Mikal Bridges, DeAndre Ayton, all around the same age, right? And then they added Chris Paul, like that veteran guy
Right.
that they needed. So if you're the Pistons and you can build a solid core, and then in 2 years when those guys are ready, you can put a star player with them in free
Right.
agency or however it is you do that, then I feel like that's the way you win. Not necessarily that those three young guys are going to win it themselves, but at least you
Right.
have the makings of a championship team.
I'd just like to correct something actually.
Yeah.
Mikal Bridges is 25,
Oh,
which I
wow.
did not
Okay.
know. I thought he was like 21, 22 years old. But I guess he
Well, there
just
you
had
go.
a quiet first couple years in the league. So yeah, I guess never mind. Then I stand completely corrected. But in my head, it still doesn't make sense to have a whole bunch of players who are like 19 and 20 years old
Right.
and having them build together because they're going to build together with no veterans and no winning presence and everything to have them learn to be great players.
Right. Which is fair. And I heard I was listening to JJ Redick's podcast with and they had Draymond Green on and
Yeah, that was an awesome episode for anybody who hasn't heard that.
he was talking about the importance of veteran players on even bad teams where it's like if you put together a whole bunch of young players, like you just pointed out, who's teaching them how to win and how to be good? All they're learning, like all the Pistons players are learning right now, unless I don't even know if they have any veterans on that team. But all the Pistons players are learning right now is how to be terrible.
Well, and that's the Zach LaVine situation. Zach LaVine had won 4 games in a row in his career till he went to the Olympics this summer.
Right. And like it's always nice to add a veteran presence. Obviously, it's a little bit harder when you're a bad team and no veteran wants to come. Um, but it's always nice to add a veteran presence who can teach those players how to win and how to get to the highest level.
Right.
And obviously, the Pistons don't have that right now. But
No, absolutely. I don't know. I could see that trade happening. I could see obviously why the Bulls want it to happen, but I just don't think there's enough in it for the Pistons.
yeah, I mean, we've really only talked about the Pistons. In terms of the Bulls, you'd hope that fully healthy, they're now starting Lonzo, Zach LaVine, DeMar, Jeremy Grant, and
Vooch.
Vucevic. And that's
It's a
a pretty
no-brainer.
nasty lineup.
Absolutely. And Caruso off the bench, which, mind you, Chicago's been killed with injuries. I think Lonzo and
Yeah,
Caruso were both out like 4 to 6 weeks or something.
yeah,
So, but obviously, that's what I mean. So for the Bulls, to me, it's clear. You slot Jeremy Grant into the starting lineup in the same position he was in Denver,
right.
just to be that final guy who's a really solid starter if he's your fifth starter kind of thing, and just to make it work. But yeah, I don't know if there's enough there for the Pistons. The big trade
Anyway,
that I see that could work is Burks, Fournier, and Kemba for Russell Westbrook and Wayne Ellington.
Burks, Fournier, I like it for both teams, to
You
be
like it
honest.
for both teams?
I think it gets the Lakers off of Westbrook, which I
Right.
think they want. And I think Kemba can be a more positive player, or a better fit on a team like the Lakers than Westbrook can. And the addition of scoring in Fournier and Burks, I like Burks off the bench on the Lakers too. And I feel like the Knicks, who are, I think, back to being bad after they had one good year last year,
Yeah.
which is really too bad for them. They're the 12 seed at 24 and 28. You
Julius
add,
Randle only had 1 year in him.
and you can let Russell Westbrook kind of be Russell Westbrook. And since you're bad and in a big market, you're probably just looking for somebody to almost sell tickets. So you
Right.
can let Russell Westbrook average 24, 26, 9, and 8, which I'm sure he's still capable of.
Right.
Um, you're just not really going to win with that, but you weren't winning anyway. So I bet I don't really like it for the Knicks. I think the Knicks would do it, and I think the
Right.
Lakers would do it in a heartbeat.
The only thing that I struggle with on the Lakers end of things, Fournier's not shooting the ball well this year. Kemba isn't Charlotte Kemba anymore,
Right.
and Burks is just like a solid role player. So you get into this tricky situation where, to me, bringing in Kemba would almost be like the whole Carmelo Anthony situation, where you get
Right.
excited, you're like, oh my, like we're getting Kemba Walker, right? But it's not like you're getting prime Charlotte All Star Kemba Walker. You're getting Kemba Walker, who a couple times has been taken out of the Knicks rotation because he's having a really bad year and has a lot of knee problems.
Right. But we saw Kemba Walker even just 2 years ago in the bubble for the Celtics as a really solid like point guard. Now he was that team wasn't didn't have as quality superstars as the Lakers currently do with LeBron and Davis. They had Tatum and Jalen Brown,
Right.
but I think Kemba is still able to score at a decent clip, and if he's this year, even though he's having a down season in terms of scoring, he's shooting the three at 37.4%.
Right.
So if you insert Kemba as a ball handler, a good decision maker, like he's not going to have the turnovers of Westbrook,
Right.
and he's able to shoot threes at 10% better than Westbrook, I think he just fits way better with the Lakers team than Westbrook does.
Right. And then the final piece to that, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, is whether or not he'll be on the court enough.
Right. Yeah. All of these trades we're talking about are assuming that teams can get healthy.
Right.
Because of course, like for the Bulls, you can trade for Jeremy Grant, but if you're missing two starters, like you're probably not going to win anyway. So
No,
what's the point?
exactly. So then one final interesting trade I have is the whole Harden Simmons situation, which has been talked about on ESPN 10,000 times.
Yeah.
If I'm Brooklyn, you can't trade Harden for Ben Simmons because you don't know what you're getting with Simmons. And even if you lose with Kevin Durant, on the road Kyrie, and Harden, at least you tried. But if you're the GM and ownership and everything that traded away Harden when you had Harden, Durant, and Kyrie all locked down at least for the rest of this year, you'll never live that down because we'll never know what could have happened. Versus if you
Right.
try it and we see you lose, at least we know you tried it.
Yeah. Like currently, if let's say the Nets play the 76ers in the playoffs and hypothetically Ben Simmons came back and the Nets lost to the 76ers. It was like, okay, you had three superstars. They didn't mesh, right?
Right.
It just didn't work. You tried it. It doesn't work. Blow it up. Keep Kevin Durant. Figure something else out. But if you
Right.
trade James Harden for Ben Simmons, and then let's say the Nets and 76ers meet in the playoffs, and the Nets lose to the 76ers and James Harden,
Right.
I can't imagine the blowback the Nets front office would get.
No, exactly. One interesting thing, and I believe it was either on the Hoop Collective with Brian Windhorst or it was on the Low Post with Zach Lowe. But this is my favorite piece of news that I heard all year, and both like NBA and calendar year so far. So let's say the Nets lose this year in the second, third round, whatever, on the road, Kyrie, the whole thing just doesn't work. So Harden hasn't re-signed yet, and there's a chance that Harden will try to get out and go to Philly or go somewhere else that's not Brooklyn.
But
And then the Brooklyn Nets, frankly, will be the best team that we never really got to see try because
right,
of all the injuries they've had in the past couple of years, and then like Kyrie, they don't have a full Kyrie this year. Kevin Durant's hurt again, so they'll be the best team potentially that we never really got to see play.
right.
My favorite piece of news is that the way it's shaping up, Brooklyn could be in the playing game, and let's say, like I said, assume they lose here, and that this is the last year for the Brooklyn situation if they lose this year.
Hmm.
This whole best team thing, the potential best team that we never got to see play, could end with Brooklyn playing the play-in game in Toronto, and Kyrie Irving can't play, and the Raptors don't have any fans. So it's just like the Raptor mascot, like dancing around the sidelines. And if we beat Harden and KD, which it's a playing game, so it's a one-off. So if we beat them, just coincidentally, like Siakam and Freddie each drop 30, and Scotty Barnes has a great game, then we had like this undervalued Raptors team and the Brooklyn Nets because they couldn't
Uh,
have any. There were no fans, but Kyrie Irving couldn't play because it's Toronto, and like how amazing overall would that be? So then we
uh,
temporarily ended the Warriors in 2019 when Kawhi just went crazy, and then we're gonna end the Brooklyn Nets because Kyrie is not allowed to come to Toronto.
what that would be such a fitting end for what the Nets have been to this point.
Wouldn't it be? That's exactly. I'm gonna say it was Zach Lowe. That's exactly what Zach Lowe said. It would be such a fitting end to just see the Nets that never made it work get blown up because Kyrie's not allowed to come to Toronto, and it's just like there's no fans and the Raptor mascot's just dancing around the sidelines.
Yeah, that would be for all the chaos that the Nets have been and all the rumors and all that Kyrie not playing for various reasons, even like before COVID vaccinations was an issue. I feel like he still wasn't playing a lot for like personal reasons or whatever it was.
Right.
Harden's been hurt and Harden's been bad and Kevin Durant's been hurt. Like it would just make sense for them
And
to
like the
lose
whole
in
Kevin Durant,
Toronto.
Kevin Durant had a shoe size one smaller, and like
Yeah.
it would be the
It,
perfect ending. It would make
yeah.
my whole calendar year of 2022 if we eliminate Brooklyn in the play-in game in Toronto.
Yeah, it would just make perfect sense for Brooklyn to lose in a one-off game they weren't supposed to be in, where Kyrie can't play even though he wants to, and there are no fans to watch them lose.
Right. No, I think I'm looking forward to that. I hope that comes true. I don't even care. Like if that happens, I don't even care how the Raptors do after that. I just want that scenario to exist. So then
Uh,
going back to the broader point was the Harden Simmons. So I touched on I wouldn't move Harden for Simmons this season, whether or not you do it in the offseason, if Harden indicates that he wants out kind of thing, if you lose in the second round or third round,
right,
that's fine. And I would absolutely move Harden for Simmons in the offseason.
right.
What do you think the odds are that Simmons gets moved before the trade deadline? Like if you had to put money on one side or the other, what are you picking?
He's not. He's not going. Daryl Morey is asking for a ridiculous return for Simmons, um, and I feel like the teams that were in on him, like the Kings, are now out.
Are they really out though, or did they just say they're out?
I think they're really out. I think they've decided that Ben Simmons isn't worth trading. Probably what Daryl Morey's asking for is De'Aaron Fox, Buddy Hield, Tyrese Halliburton, and 4 first-round picks. Um,
Right. Yeah,
And
fair enough.
it's
And the naming rights to the arena and the city of Sacramento, like
yeah, they have to change the team to the Sacramento Mories.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah,
And
so
Harden gets to play on it if they're better.
yeah, so I think the asking price is too high. I think the only places he could go are the Nets and Trailblazers. I don't think any of the bad teams that were thinking, hey, maybe we take a shot at Simmons are thinking that anymore with that kind of asking price.
Right. So then the tricky thing is, how many places are there for Simmons to go realistically?
I think two.
You think two?
I think the two I just mentioned, the Nets for Harden and uh, the Trailblazers for McCollum or Lillard.
I'd still bring him to Toronto, but I know it's an unpopular opinion. But I just
I
frankly don't.
wouldn't trade for Van Fleet for him. I wouldn't do
I
it.
would. I know that's going to be unpopular among our many Toronto Raptors fans who listen. Probably only Toronto Raptors fans who listen, honestly. But like, I just frankly don't think like the current setup with Freddie's going to win us anything unless we get like a lucky Kawhi situation again. But like, I think, and not that I think Ben Simmons will particularly win you anything either, but it's the same situation. I almost feel like we're in the same situation as Portland is, where I just don't think you have enough. And it may look like at given moments you have enough, but on the whole, you're not going to win all the 7-game series you need to win to win the championship. So I think Scotty Barnes and Ben Simmons side by side is interesting enough that I'd be prepared to see what happens out of indifference.
Right. In terms of the Raptors, I don't think they're ready to win yet, but I think Scotty Barnes is 20, and I think Gary Trent's 23, and OG's 23 or 24 maybe.
Right.
And so in 3 years, when Van Fleet's 30 and Siakam's 30, and now if Scotty Barnes can go from what I think he currently is as your third best player,
Right.
um, fourth recently since Gary Trent's just dropping 30 every single game.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole
Um,
different thing, right?
if Gary Trent can be a scorer like that, and Scotty Barnes can move from your third best player to your second best player or your first best player, and he surpasses one of Siakam or Van Fleet in quality, suddenly you have three guys who could make an all-star game. And now you have
Right.
three.
Oh, sorry, you cut out there. Give it one more time.
So yeah, if Scotty Barnes can take that jump to become the best or second best player on the team, you
Right.
now have three potential all-star caliber players with OG who can be all defensive and Gary Trent who can be an elite scorer at times.
Okay, so hear me out then. To do what very similar to what Portland did. Let's say Gary Trent's going to keep up a good level of production.
Yeah.
You trade Fred. You've Ben Simmons, Gary Trent, OG Anunoby, Scotty Barnes, and Siakam.
I just don't trust what Ben Simmons is going to bring me. And
See,
Van Fleet as a leader of the team, I think he's the leader of the team right now. And
right,
as a 40% three-point shooter that I'm totally comfortable with taking threes from the logo in big situations.
right,
Like, I don't think if we go back to the Heat triple overtime game that they
right,
recently played, Van Fleet hit big, deep threes in overtime. And I think they lose that game if they have Ben Simmons instead of Van Fleet.
right. And I acknowledge that I'm higher on Ben Simmons than most people are. But I'm very much when I look at the NBA on the most part, I'm a championship or bust scenario. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm very prepared to take the flyer on Ben Simmons to see just if it would work because I don't when I look at the Raptors right now, I don't necessarily see a championship.
Right.
So
But I wouldn't
I'm
see a
prepared to
championship
take a
with Ben
risk on that.
Simmons.
But if we can improve his trade value and turn him into an all-star again, then he might be worth a piece later on. But at least the premise of Scotty Barnes and Ben Simmons side by side interests me enough to try it.
Right. And I think to me, the biggest upgrade Ben Simmons is supposed to be in terms of like the downgrade on trading a point guard for Ben Simmons is shooting, but the upgrade's supposed to be defense, and Ben Simmons can go be a first team All NBA defender. But I think Fred VanVleet can be a second team All NBA defender.
Right.
So is
No,
it
and
really
fair
worth
enough.
trading the best defensive point guard in the league for the third best defensive point guard in the league when Ben Simmons is shooting 30% lower from three? I don't think so, but
Well, to be fair though, the third best defensive point guard in the league who can also defend every other position.
yeah, the versatility is big there.
No, absolutely. So yeah, it's an interesting premise, and you could argue on the other hand that if you just wait, similar to what we did in 2019, we can keep our current team, and then we just make one move to get like a superstar player, and then we have another run at it. So that would
Right.
be, in my opinion, which I know you touched on, the biggest deciding factor to maybe just holding on to everybody
Right.
and just seeing what we can do. Is if we just held on to DeRozan and then eventually we made something happen and it was worth it. So we could
Right.
end up in that scenario again when Scotty Barnes is 22 years old or 21 or something. But
Yeah.
like I said, on the whole, I'm willing to take the shot on it.
Yeah. I really don't want to move this. I want to give this team like just two, maybe 1 or 2 more years to see Scotty Barnes grow and see what this team can do. Because I feel like in a year that I expected almost nothing from them, they'll probably be the fifth or the sixth seed.
Right.
So
No, exactly. Which it'll be interesting to see. And this year in the playoffs, we'll get a better indicator of what it's going to look like.
yeah, definitely.
Form now. So we're in the darkness right now, and we'll have to see what happens when they really get a chance to play some big games.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm happy now to bring us to the tweet of the week. This one's going to come from Desmond Bain, who Desmond Bain had an eventful week because he had to kick Julius Randle out of the huddle because in a close game, Julius Randle just like walked into the Grizzlies huddle, and Julius Randle's a scary dude. Like Desmond Bain's obviously also an NBA player, but like Julius Randle's like a big bruising power forward. I would not want to kick that guy out of the huddle. So shout out to Desmond Bain for taking the responsibility to do that. But
Yeah.
furthermore, that brings us to the tweet, which is completely unrelated, but I like talking about Desmond Bain as much as I can.
Desmond Bain, who, if we go back a couple podcasts, he won an All-Star game with Paul George. Anyway, go ahead.
Paul George, who's played like 20 games. But anyway, so Desmond Bain, who wears number 22, shot 22.2% from the field with 2 assists, 2 blocks, 2 steals, 2 fouls, and 2 turnovers on February 2nd, 22, which is 2/2/22. So it's incredible that that happened. But the funny thing is, Desmond Bain tweeted it when he shot 22% from the field, 2 turnovers, and 2 fouls. Desmond Bain tweeted. So yeah, it's cool that that all lined up on the given day. So it was 2s right across the board. But like, I mean, not your coolest moment.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, that's a crazy thing to have happened, but to retweet something about you shooting 22% from the field it's a little interesting.
Yeah, so we've got John Morant retweeting other people saying that he should be an all-star, and we've got Desmond Bain retweeting that he shot 22% from the field with 2 turnovers and 2 fouls.
And just one more thing I want to touch on the Grizzlies that I guess is along the tweet of the week type vibe. This was almost a week ago, maybe more than a week ago. Steven Adams just picking up Tony Bradley, who I think is like 6'9", and just walking him away from John Morant. Like, nope, you can't touch him.
The Grizzlies are NBA League Pass must-see TV. It's like the Hornets of last year where we had LaMelo which the Hornets of this year are also still must-see TV. But the Grizzlies are like the up-and-coming must-see TV where we didn't necessarily think at the start of the season that you'd want to watch every Grizzlies game. But now it's like you add Grizzlies to one of like your favorite teams so you get notifications of when they're playing because you're like, yeah, I might just take a look at some more Grizzlies games.
Yeah. Yeah, the Grizzlies are really, really interesting for sure.
John Morant's incredible. I can't wait to see the player he turns into.
Yeah, that's exciting. Hopefully Russell Westbrook like in his prime and just better winning.
Better winner, better shooter. So that's all we've got this week on the In the Clutch podcast. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.